They threw us out onto the street like unwanted garbage. My son was crying, clutching the only photograph of his father to his chest. I swore that one day they would regret the day they decided they could treat us that way. My name is Anna. 10 years ago, I was an ordinary girl from a small town with big dreams. I worked in the local library and studied in the evening division of the Pedagogical Institute. My parents died when I was 19, leaving me only a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Life was not easy, but I managed. At the library, I met Mikhail. He was handsome, intelligent, and well-educated. His family owned several successful businesses in our region, and everyone knew the Sokolov name. Mikhail often came to the library to work in silence, away from the family business. He said that only there could he truly focus on his projects. Our acquaintance began with conversations about books. Then there were walks after my work, dinners in small cafes on the outskirts of the city. His family did not know about our relationship. Mikhail said that his parents were very conservative and had certain plans for his future, including marriage to the daughter of their longtime business partners. Despite this, our relationship became more and more serious. A year later, Mikhail rented a small apartment for us in the city center. We were happy in our little world. I still worked in the library, but now I could afford to study in the daytime division, as Mikhail insisted on helping me financially. He said that he believed in me and my future. 2 years later, I became pregnant. It was unexpected for both of us. Mikhail was shocked, but after a few days of reflection, he said that he was happy about it. We started planning our life together. He promised to tell his family about us after the birth of the child, when, according to him, they would no longer be able to change anything. I believed him and his plans. Our son, Alexei, was born a healthy and beautiful boy. Mikhail was with me during childbirth, holding my hand and crying when he first held his son in his arms. It was the happiest time of my life. We formed our little family, full of love and hope. Mikhail bought us a house in the suburbs, small but cozy, with a garden where Alexei could play. He said that it was a temporary solution and one day we would live in a big house, when all the issues with his family were resolved. Alexei grew up to be a smart and inquisitive boy. He looked so much like his father. The same dark hair, the same deep brown eyes, the same inquisitive look. Mikhail adored his son, spending all his free time with him. He read him books, taught him to ride a bicycle, and built castles out of construction sets with him. Our life seemed ideal, despite the constant shadow of Mikhail's family that hung over us. By the time Alexei was 5, I had graduated from the institute and started working as a teacher in the local school. Mikhail was proud of me. We rarely talked about his family, but I knew that it was a painful topic for him. Sometimes he received calls after which he became gloomy and withdrawn. At such moments, I simply gave him space, understanding that the pressure from his family was enormous. He was the sole heir to the family business, and his parents had certain expectations. Our life flowed smoothly. In the morning, I took Alexei to school, then went to work. Mikhail worked in one of his family's companies, but always found time to be with us. In the evening, we spent time together discussing our day, helping Alexei with his homework, and planning weekends. We were happy in our little world, protected from external problems. 2 months before Alexei turned 6, Mikhail began to behave strangely. He often stayed late at work, became absent-minded, and sometimes did not answer my calls. When I asked what was happening, he brushed it off, saying that it was just problems at work. I believed him, although somewhere deep inside I began to feel anxious. One evening, Mikhail returned home late with a bottle of expensive wine. His eyes sparkled with strange excitement. He said that he had finally decided to tell his parents about us. According to him, the conversation went better than he expected. His parents wanted to meet us to meet their grandson. I was in shock, not believing my happiness. Finally, after so many years, we could become a real family, recognized by everyone. We celebrated late into the night, making plans for the future. Mikhail was unusually pensive in the following days. I attributed it to the excitement before the important meeting. He said that his parents were inviting us to a family dinner at their country house next weekend. I was nervous but also excited. I bought new outfits for myself and Alexei, spending hours choosing a gift for Mikhail's parents. I wanted to make a good impression, to show that I was worthy of their son and their respect. The development of betrayal on the day before the scheduled meeting. Mikhail did not come home for the night. He did not answer calls, and I began to worry seriously. In the morning, when I was preparing breakfast for Alexei, there was a knock at the door. A stranger in a strict suit stood on the doorstep. He introduced himself as a lawyer for the Sokolov family and coldly informed me that Mikhail had been in a car accident the previous night and was in critical condition in the hospital. The world collapsed in an instant. I don't remember how I got dressed, how I called a taxi, how I arranged for a neighbor to look after Alexei. At the hospital, I was met by a wall of coldness and alienation. The nurses didn't want to say anything. The doctors avoided me. Finally, one young nurse, seeing my despair, quietly said that Mikhail was in intensive care and visitors were not allowed. She also mentioned that his parents were already there and were with him. I waited in the corridor for hours, hoping to get some information. Closer to the evening, an elderly couple came out of the ward, whom I immediately recognized from the photographs that Mikhail had secretly shown me. His parents. They were elegant even in grief. The woman, Elena Sokolova, noticed me. Her gaze was cold and assessing. She approached me with an expression of contempt on her face. Elena asked who I was and what I was doing there. I introduced myself as Mikhail's common-law wife and the mother of his son. Her face contorted with anger. She stated that she knew of no wife and no son, that Mikhail was engaged to the daughter of their friends and the wedding was planned in 2 months. I was in shock. This couldn't be true. Not after all the years we had spent together. Not after all his promises. The hospital guards took me out of the building at the request of Mikhail's parents. I returned home broken and confused. Alexei asked about his father, and I didn't know what to tell him. I decided to wait, hoping that Mikhail would recover and explain everything. I needed to believe that this was some kind of misunderstanding. The next day, I tried to get into the hospital again. This time, I was stopped at the entrance. The guards had clear instructions not to let me in. I called the reception desk, begged the nurses to give me information about Mikhail's condition, but no one wanted to talk to me. In the evening of the same day, the same lawyer called me and dryly informed me that Mikhail had died from his injuries. The funeral would be in 3 days, and I was not expected there. Couldn't believe it. Mikhail couldn't just leave, leaving Alexei and me. It was impossible. I decided to go to the funeral despite the ban. Alexei deserved to say goodbye to his father. I understood that it would be difficult, but I did not expect how much. On the day of the funeral, Alexei and I dressed in black. My son was quiet and sad, not quite understanding what was happening, but feeling my pain. We arrived at the church where the service was to be held. There were many people there, all in expensive black clothes with expressions of grief on their faces. I recognized some of them from the photos that Mikhail had shown me. Colleagues from work, distant relatives. We quietly entered and sat in the last row. Alexei held my hand tightly, looking at his father's coffin at the altar. The service was beautiful and solemn. Many spoke of Mikhail, his kindness, his talents, his prospects. No one, not a single word, mentioned his other life, his son. As if we had never existed. After the service, when everyone headed for the exit to follow the coffin to the cemetery, Elena Sokolova noticed us. Her face twisted with rage. She approached us with quick steps. Her husband and several burly men, probably bodyguards, followed her. Elena, loudly so that everyone present could hear, accused me of being her son's mistress, of trying to manipulate him and extort money using the child. I was shocked by her words. People around began to whisper, looking at us with condemnation. Alexei pressed against me in fright, not understanding why this scary woman was shouting at his mom. I tried to explain that Mikhail and I loved each other, that Alexei was really his son, but Elena didn't listen. She ordered the guards to take us out of the church. 2 strong men grabbed me by the arms and dragged me to the exit. Alexei cried, trying to hold on to me. One of the guards roughly pushed him away, and my son fell on the stone floor of the church. That was the last straw. I screamed, breaking free from the men's hands. I managed to run to Alexei, pick him up in my arms. His knee was broken, and blood stained his black pants. Everyone froze at this scene. Suddenly, a tall, gray-haired man whom I did not know came out of the crowd. He authoritatively raised his hand, stopping the guards. It was Viktor Demidov, a well-known businessman and longtime friend of the Sokolov family. He looked at me, then at Alexei, and something changed in his gaze. He quietly said something to Elena, and she reluctantly nodded. The guards let me go, and Viktor offered us to go out with him on the street. Viktor apologized for the behavior of the Sokolov family. He explained that he had known Mikhail since childhood and saw his features in Alexei. He asked where we lived and offered to drive us home. On the way home, he questioned me about our relationship with Mikhail. I told him everything, seeing no point in hiding the truth. There were no secrets left in my story. Viktor listened carefully, sometimes asking clarifying questions. When we drove up to the house, he gave me his business card and said that he wanted to help Alexei and me. I didn't know if I could trust him, but I had no choice. We were alone, and I had to take care of my son's future. I didn't go to the cemetery. I didn't want to expose Alexei to new shocks. We returned home, and I tried to calm my son, explaining to him what had happened in a language accessible to a 6-year-old child. It was the hardest conversation of my life. Seeing the pain and incomprehension in my boy's eyes was unbearable. The day after the funeral, I received an official letter from the lawyer of the Sokolov family. It said that the house in which we lived had been purchased in Mikhail's name and was now the property of his parents, as the sole heirs. We were given a week to vacate the premises. I couldn't believe their cruelty. They not only took Alexei's father away from him, but now they wanted to deprive him of his home. I tried to find some documents confirming our rights. I rummaged through all of Mikhail's papers, but found nothing. He always handled financial matters himself, saying that I shouldn't worry about it. Now I understood why. He never formalized our relationship officially, never recognized Alexei as his son on paper. We had been living a lie all these years. In despair, I called the number on Viktor Demidov's business card. His secretary initially refused to connect me with him, but when I gave my name, he changed. A minute later, Viktor picked up the phone. I told him about the letter about being evicted from the house. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "May I meet with you tonight?" I agreed. Viktor arrived in a luxurious black car with a driver. He insisted that I take Alexei with me. We went to his country house, a huge mansion with a park and a lake. There we were met by his wife, Sophia, an elegant middle-aged woman. She was surprisingly kind to Alexei, immediately offering to show him a collection of antique toys that they kept for their grandchildren. When Alexei left with Sophia, Viktor invited me into his office. He directly asked what I wanted to achieve. I answered honestly that I wanted to protect my son's future, that Alexei had the right to his father's inheritance and to a decent life. Viktor listened attentively, then told me something that turned my world upside down. It turned out that Mikhail was not as simple as he seemed. A month before his death, he met with Viktor and told him about Alexei and me. He asked his old family friend to be the executor of his unofficial will if something happened to him. Mikhail knew about his parents' plans, to marry him to the daughter of their business partners. He was afraid of their reaction, but he no longer wanted to live a double life. Mikhail gave Viktor documents for significant funds invested in various assets abroad and ordered that in the event of his death, these funds would be transferred to Alexei and me. He also left a letter in which he recognized Alexei as his son and asked for forgiveness for his cowardice. Viktor took a folder with documents and a letter from the safe. I read Mikhail's words through tears, not believing that he really cared about our future. Viktor explained that now Alexei and I were financially secure, but warned that the Sokolov family would not leave us alone if they found out about it. They could challenge the will, claiming that Mikhail was incapacitated or under pressure. Viktor offered me a deal. He would help us move to another city where we would have a new house and a new life. In return, He asked that in the future I help him in a matter related to the Sokolov family. He did not specify the details, saying only that it would be legal and fair. I didn't know if I could trust Victor, but I had no choice. I agreed to his terms. We agreed that in a week we would move to St. Petersburg, where a new house was already waiting for us. Victor promised to help me find a job in a prestigious school and to enroll Alexei in a good school. Before that, we could stay in his guest house to avoid an unpleasant meeting with representatives of the Sokolov family, who would surely come to evict us. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words from Mikhail's letter, his confessions and apologies, were spinning in my head. I felt both pain and relief at the same time. Pain from his betrayal, from the fact that he had hidden us for years, and relief that he had still taken care of us, not abandoned us completely. I didn't know what to think about Victor and his offer, what kind of matter he had in mind. But I knew one thing. The Sokolov family was not to go unpunished after what they had done to us. The emotional consequences of the following 2 months were like a strange dream. Alexei and I moved to St. Petersburg, to a spacious house in a quiet suburb. Victor kept all his promises. I was offered a position as a literature teacher in one of the best private schools in the city. Alexei went to the first grade of the same school. Outwardly, our life was improving, but inside I was broken. Every night, when Alexei fell asleep, I reread Mikhail's letter. I analyzed every word, every phrase, trying to understand if he really loved us, or if we were just a convenient refuge from the pressure of his parents. In the letter, he asked for forgiveness for his weakness, for not being able to resist his family and openly recognize us. He wrote that he loved us, but I no longer knew if I could believe his words. Alexei was having a hard time with the loss of his father and the move. He became withdrawn, spoke little, and often woke up at night from nightmares. The school psychologist said that this was a normal reaction to trauma and that he would get better over time. I tried to be strong for my son, but sometimes, when I was alone, I let myself cry. I felt cheated, used, and thrown away. Victor called regularly, asking about our affairs. He was surprisingly attentive and caring. Sometimes I wondered about his motives. Why was this powerful man helping us so much? What connected him to Mikhail besides old family friendship? What matter did he have in mind when he spoke of his request? These questions haunted me. 3 months after the move, I received a call from the lawyer of the Sokolov family. They had somehow found us and were demanding a DNA test for Alexei. They did not believe that he was Mikhail's son and threatened to sue if I refused. I was in a panic, not because I was afraid of the test results. I knew that Alexei was Mikhail's son, but I was afraid that they would try to take him away from me if the test confirmed the relationship. I called Victor, and he instantly took the situation into his own hands. He organized a meeting with the best lawyers in the city. They explained to me that even if the DNA test confirmed that Alexei was Mikhail's son, the Sokolov family would not be able to obtain custody over him. I was his mother, and the law was on my side. However, they could claim the right to inheritance and participation in his upbringing. The lawyers proposed a strategy. We agree to the DNA test, but only through the court with all the formalities observed. We also file a counterclaim for the recognition of Mikhail's paternity and the recovery of alimony from his heirs, that is, his parents. It was an aggressive tactic, but the lawyers believed that it could work. The Sokolov family would not want a public scandal and might agree to a settlement. I agreed with their plan, although the thought of litigation frightened me. I didn't want to meet Elena Sokolova and her husband again. I didn't want Alexei to be drawn into this dirty story, but I understood that our future depended on it. If I back down now, they will never leave us alone. The trial began a month later. It was closed without the participation of the press, but it still attracted attention in certain circles. The Sokolov family was represented by a whole staff of expensive lawyers. They tried to present me as a swindler who manipulated Mikhail and was now trying to gain access to the family fortune through the child. My lawyers presented evidence of our relationship with Mikhail: photographs, letters, testimony from neighbors and colleagues. They also demanded recognition of paternity and payment of alimony for all the years of Alexei's life. The amount of the claim was huge, and it was a tactical move. We did not expect the court to award the entire amount, but it gave room for negotiations. The DNA test confirmed that Alexei was Mikhail's son. This was a turning point in the case. The court recognized paternity, and now it was only a matter of financial compensation. The Sokolov family found themselves in a difficult situation. They could no longer deny the existence of their grandson, but they did not want to share the inheritance with him either. After several weeks of tense negotiations, we reached a settlement. The Sokolov family recognized Alexei as their grandson and agreed to pay significant compensation, but refused any participation in his upbringing and any further claims to communicate with him. This suited me completely. I didn't want these cold, calculating people to have any influence on my son. When the agreement was signed and the first payment was credited to Alexei's account, I felt a strange emptiness. Months of struggle had ended. We got what we wanted, but I didn't feel satisfied. I still felt the bitterness from everything we had to go through. From the humiliation at the funeral, from the need to prove the obvious in court, from the cold contempt of Elena Sokolova, who even after the confirmation of the DNA test looked at Alexei as something shameful. That evening, after putting Alexei to bed, I allowed myself for the first time to truly feel anger. Not quiet resentment, not sadness, but real, burning rage. They didn't just reject us. They publicly humiliated my son and me, treated us like dirt, threw us out of the house like unwanted garbage, and now they thought they had bought us off, that they could live on as if nothing had happened. I took out a photograph of the Sokolov family that I found on the internet. Elena and Vladimir Sokolov. Refined, arrogant, confident in their inviolability. They ruined their son's life, forcing him to choose between us and family duty. They deprived my Alexei of his father and forced us to go through public humiliation. They deserved retribution. I called Viktor Demidov. He answered immediately, as if he was waiting for my call. I asked him about the matter in which he wanted me to help him. Viktor was silent for a few seconds, then said that he would come tomorrow and we would talk in person. I agreed, feeling that it was the beginning of something new and dangerous, but I was ready. Viktor arrived the next day when Alexei was at school. He looked serious and focused. We sat in my office, and he told me a story that turned my perception of the Sokolov family and what happened to Mikhail upside down. Viktor and Vladimir Sokolov had been business partners for many years. They started a business together in the 90s, went through all the difficulties of the market formation in Russia. Viktor knew Mikhail since childhood and was his godfather. 3 years ago, Viktor discovered that Vladimir was systematically deceiving him, withdrawing assets from their joint ventures. When Viktor tried to understand the situation, Vladimir used his connections in law enforcement agencies to start inspections of Viktor's company. Mikhail, working in one of his father's companies, discovered documents confirming Vladimir's machinations. He was shocked by his father's actions and turned to Viktor. Together they began to collect evidence. Mikhail risked betraying his family, but he believed in justice. He also wanted to protect Alexei and me, knowing that when the truth came out, his parents would be furious. A week before his death, Mikhail told his parents that he knew about their machinations and that he was going to marry me and officially recognize Alexei. This was a double blow to the Sokolovs. Elena and Vladimir were furious. They threatened to deprive him of his inheritance, to ruin his career, but Mikhail was adamant. He was going to meet with Viktor and give him the latest evidence that could lead to a criminal case against his father. Viktor was sure that Mikhail's accident was not accidental. Technical examinations showed that the braking system of his car was damaged, but proving Vladimir Sokolov's involvement in this was impossible. He had 2 strong connections in the police and prosecutor's office. Any investigation would be blocked at an early stage. Now Viktor wanted my help with another plan. He was going to destroy the Sokolov's business, but for this he needed someone inside their company, someone he could trust, someone who had personal motives for revenge, but was not directly connected with Viktor. He was offering me to be that person. The plan was risky and long-term. I had to change my appearance, create a new identity, and get a job in the head office of the Sokolov's company. With my education and experience, I could apply for a position in the Human Resources Department or in the Administrative Department. From there, I would gain access to internal information that could be used against them. I was shocked by Victor's offer and by the story he told. All this sounded like a spy movie, not real life. I asked him if he really thought that Mikhail's parents could have been involved in his death. Victor seriously replied that he had no direct evidence, but knew Vladimir well enough to consider him capable of such an act. I needed time to think everything over. It was dangerous, possibly illegal, and I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved in such intrigues. But the thought that the Sokolovs could have been involved in Mikhail's death haunted me. If it was true, they didn't just humiliate us. They killed my child's father. Victor gave me a week to think. During this time, I had to decide whether I was ready to risk everything for revenge and justice. He promised that if I refused, it would not affect his help to Alexei and me in any way. We would still be under his protection. I spent this week in agonizing thoughts. I thought about Mikhail, about our life together, about what kind of father he was for Alexei. I remembered Elena Sokolova's face when she ordered the guards to take us out of the church. Her contemptuous words, the humiliation we experienced. I thought about Alexei's future, about the fact that these people would never recognize him as part of their family, would always look down on him. At the end of the week, I made a decision. I called Victor and said that I agreed, but I had one condition. Alexei must not know anything about this. He had to remain safe, away from this whole story. Victor agreed. He suggested that during my work at the Sokolovs company, Alexei live with his wife Sofia in their country house. There he would be looked after and protected. Officially, I would be working abroad. It would be difficult to contact me, but I would regularly call my son and visit him at the first opportunity. It was a difficult decision, but I felt that I had to do it. It wasn't just about revenge, but also about justice. For Mikhail, who died trying to protect us and correct a wrong. For Alexei, who deserved to know that his father was a good man and that those who harmed him were punished. The plan was complex and required careful preparation. Victor introduced me to his trusted contact, a former intelligence officer. He was supposed to help me create a new identity, change my appearance, and prepare for working undercover. I spent the next 3 months in intensive training. I changed my hair color, style of clothing, and even the way I spoke. I became Elena Vasilieva, a graduate of a prestigious university with experience in international companies. We created a detailed backstory, documents, recommendations from previous employers, and profiles on social media. All of this was meticulously prepared by Victor's team. I studied the Sokolovs' business, their companies, and their methods of operation. I needed to know the enemy from the inside to avoid making mistakes. The hardest part was explaining everything to Alexei. He was almost 7 years old and already understood quite well what was happening around him. I told him that I had been offered an important job abroad and that it was a good opportunity for our future. I promised to call regularly and visit him as often as I could. Alexei was upset, but he had already become attached to Sofia and her grandchildren, with whom he spent a lot of time. He promised me that he would be strong and study hard. The day I said goodbye to Alexei was one of the hardest days of my life. I hugged him, inhaling the scent of his hair, memorizing every feature of his face. I didn't know when I would be able to see him so close again. He was brave, holding back tears, saying that he would wait for my calls every day. I left him in Victor and Sofia's house, knowing that he would be safe there. The last phase of preparation was the most intense. I received training in the use of special equipment for covertly recording conversations and copying documents. I studied accounting and financial analysis in order to understand the documents I would have to find. I practiced lying convincingly, without giving myself away with body language or facial expressions. Finally, everything was ready. Through reliable intermediaries, my resume was sent to the Sokolovs company. With my experience and recommendations, I was an ideal candidate for a position in the Human Resources Department. I went through several rounds of interviews, including a final one with the HR director. My cover story worked, and I was offered the job. On my first day in the Sokolovs company office, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I walked through the lobby of the luxurious business center where their headquarters were located, and I thought about all the events that had led me here. About Mikhail, about the funeral, about the trial, about the documents that Victor had shown me. I was ready to risk everything for justice. I had embarked on a path from which I could not turn back. My first month at the Sokolov's company was spent studying the organizational structure and building relationships with colleagues. I was friendly but not too open, competent but not outstanding. I wanted to be seen as a professional doing my job, but not remembered too well. Working in the HR department, I had access to employees' personal files and some internal documents, but to obtain truly valuable information, I needed to gain the trust of key employees and gain access to the company's restricted databases. I acted slowly and carefully, understanding that one mistake could cost me not only my job, but also my safety. After 2 months, I met Sergei Orlov, the company's chief accountant. He was a lonely, middle-aged man, devoted to his work and loyal to the Sokolov family. Sergei knew everything about the company's financial affairs, including the transactions that were not reflected in the official reports. I began to carefully build a relationship with him, showing interest in his work, inviting him to lunches, giving the impression that I admired his knowledge and experience. Sergei turned out to be a lonely person, craving attention and recognition. He willingly shared stories about his work with me, about how he had helped the Sokolov family in difficult times, and how he was valued for his loyalty. Gradually, our relationship became closer, and I began to receive small pieces of information from him about the internal affairs of the company. At the same time, I was working on the second part of the plan. My responsibilities included supervising the internship program. I selected young professionals for various departments of the company. This gave me the opportunity to introduce several more of Victor's people into the company. They went through all the standard screening procedures, but their resumes and recommendations were carefully prepared so as not to arouse suspicion. After 6 months of working at the company, I was promoted to deputy head of the HR department. This promotion was the result of my work and Victor's help, who, through his connections, ensured that my predecessor left for another company. Now I had access to more confidential information and more freedom of action. Sergei Orlov became my key source of information. Our relationship grew into something he considered a romantic connection. I wasn't proud of this deception, but I understood its necessity. Sergei began to share information with me about the Sokolov family's secret accounts, about tax evasion schemes, and about bribing officials. He believed that he was doing this in a confidential conversation with a close person, unaware that his every word was being recorded and transmitted to Victor. Gradually, Victor and I were compiling a dossier on the Sokolov family. Documents, recordings of conversations, and testimonies of people who had suffered from their actions. It was a long and painstaking process, requiring patience and caution. Each new piece of information brought us closer to our goal, but we couldn't rush. One wrong step could destroy everything we had built. In the second year of my work at the company, an event occurred that accelerated our plans. Elena Sokolova decided to personally take charge of the reorganization of the HR department. She was dissatisfied with the way personnel were being recruited and believed that the company was not hiring qualified enough employees. This meant that she would regularly visit our department and personally communicate with me. The first face-to-face meeting with Elena Sokolova after the funeral was a test of my endurance. She didn't recognize me, which was not surprising given my altered appearance. But I recognized her. The same cold gaze, the same arrogant tone. I maintained professional composure, answering her questions, presenting reports, and explaining the department's methods of operation. Elena turned out to be a meticulous leader, demanding complete obedience and absolute loyalty. She checked every detail, demanding explanations for every decision. This complicated my work, but also gave me the opportunity to get closer to the company's management methods and gain access to even more confidential information. After a few weeks of working with Elena, I noticed that she began to show me some favor. My competence and willingness to work overtime impressed her. She began to invite me to meetings where strategic issues were discussed, entrusting me with more responsible tasks. This was dangerous as it meant more attention to my person, but it also gave me more opportunities to gather information. One evening, when Elena and I were working late on a new project, she received a call that clearly upset her. After the conversation, she was irritated and depressed. I cautiously asked, "Is everything all right? Is there anything I can help with?" Elena hesitated, then said that she was worried about her grandson, Mikhail's son. The results of his latest tests at school were excellent, and this had attracted the attention of the press. Journalists began asking questions about why a boy with the Sokolov surname didn't live with the family, and why the family didn't officially acknowledge him. I was shocked. Alexei didn't have the Sokolov surname. He had always been registered under my surname. How did they find out about his connection to the Sokolov family? I tried to remain calm while Elena complained about the trouble that this child was creating for her, even without knowing it. She spoke of him as a problem that needed to be solved, not as a grandson whom she could love. That night, when I returned home, I urgently contacted Victor. He reassured me, saying that Alexei was safe, but confirmed that journalists had indeed begun to take an interest in the history of the Sokolov family and their hidden heirs. This was an unexpected complication, but Victor saw it as an opportunity. Public attention to the Sokolov family made them more vulnerable, creating pressure that we could use. We decided to accelerate our plans. We already had enough information to deal a serious blow to the Sokolovs' business, but we wanted to be sure that they would not be able to recover. We needed the final evidence confirming their involvement in Mikhail's death and in a number of illegal operations that could lead to criminal prosecution. The key to everything was Sergei Orlov. As chief accountant, he had access to all the financial documents and knew about all the secret transactions. He was devoted to the Sokolov family, but his devotion to me, as he thought, was stronger. I decided to take a risk and directly ask him for access to certain documents, explaining that it was necessary for a project that Elena had assigned me. Sergei hesitated, but eventually agreed to help. He gave me access to a secret server where the company's most confidential documents were stored. Among them were files confirming the bribery of high-ranking officials, tax evasion schemes, and falsification of financial statements. But most importantly, there were documents related to Mikhail's death. In one of the folders, I found correspondence between Vladimir Sokolov and an unknown person discussing the details of what they called the operation to eliminate the problem. The dates coincided with the time of Mikhail's death. There were no direct references to murder, but the context was clear. They talked about the mechanic who was supposed to do the work, about the need to make everything look like an accident, and about the amount that was paid for this work. My hands were shaking as I copied these files. This was confirmation of what Victor had said. Vladimir Sokolov was involved in his son's death. He preferred to kill him rather than allow Mikhail to destroy his business and reputation by acknowledging Alexei and me. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice, which I had to ensure. I handed over all the collected materials to Victor. He was shocked. Even knowing Vladimir for many years, he did not expect to find direct evidence of his involvement in his son's death. Victor said that now we had everything we needed, and it was time to act. The plan was ready. We had to strike on all fronts simultaneously: financial, legal, and reputational. The next day, I came to work as usual, but inside me, everything was seething with the awareness of what was about to happen. At lunchtime, I received a message from Victor. The operation has begun. At that moment, employees of the investigative committee, the tax service, and the FSB came to the Sokolov Central Office with a search warrant. They had warrants to seize documents and electronic storage media. Simultaneously, searches were carried out in the homes of Vladimir and Elena Sokolov and in the offices of all their subsidiaries. Panic began in the office. Employees did not understand what was happening. Elena was furious, demanding lawyers, calling some influential people, but no one answered her calls. As I learned later, Victor had taken care to neutralize all of the Sokolov family's connections in the government. Some were charged with corruption. Others were simply warned that any assistance to the Sokolovs would have serious consequences for their careers. Simultaneously with the searches, materials about the Sokolov family, their illegal business, tax evasion, and bribery of officials appeared in several leading media outlets. A separate topic was the story of Mikhail Sokolov's illegitimate son, whom the family refused to recognize, and the suspicious circumstances of Mikhail's death. Journalists asked questions, demanded comments, and published documents confirming their allegations. I watched what was happening, maintaining the appearance of a shocked employee. No one suspected my role in all of this. Sergei Orlov was one of the first to be arrested as an accomplice in the Sokolovs' financial machinations. He was crushed, not understanding how all his secrets had become the property of the investigation. At that moment, I felt pangs of conscience for his fate, but quickly suppressed them, remembering that he had been helping the Sokolovs in their crimes for years. By the end of the day, Elena Sokolova was arrested. She was led out of the building in handcuffs under the flashes of journalists' cameras. Her face, usually arrogant and confident, expressed shock and fear. She didn't understand how her empire had collapsed in one day. Who could have organized such a coordinated attack? Vladimir Sokolov was arrested at his country house. According to news reports, he resisted arrest and was wounded, not fatally, but seriously enough to be placed in a hospital under guard. All the Sokolov family's accounts, both in Russia and abroad, were frozen, their assets were seized, and their business came to a halt. A week after the start of the operation, I met with Victor at his country house. I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. We had achieved what we wanted. The Sokolov family was destroyed, their reputation ruined, and their freedom threatened. They had lost everything they valued, just as they had once made Alexei and me lose everything. But the most important thing for me was the moment when I met Alexei. I hadn't seen him for almost 2 years, communicating only by phone and occasionally by video link. He had grown up, become more serious, and looked more like his father. When he saw me, he didn't recognize me at first. I was still in the image of Elena Vasilieva, with a different hairstyle and a different style of clothing. But when I started talking, recognition appeared in his eyes. He rushed into my arms, and I finally felt that I had come home. Victor said that now that the operation was complete, I could return to a normal life. My involvement in the Sokolov case was securely protected. No one would ever know about my role. The documents that I collected were anonymized before being handed over to the authorities. Even Sergei Orlov could not link the information leaked to me, since access to the secret server was carried out from Elena Sokolova's computer, not mine. The investigation into the Sokolov case continued. They were charged with fraud, tax evasion, and corruption, but the most serious charge was the organization of Mikhail's murder. The evidence that I found, combined with the testimony of the mechanic who was found and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence, created a convincing picture of the crime. Public opinion was completely against the Sokolov family. The story of their refusal to recognize their own grandson, and the humiliation to which they subjected us at the funeral, caused a wave of indignation. Journalists sought meetings with us, wanting to know our version of the story, but Victor ensured our complete anonymity and protection from the press. 3 months after the start of the investigation, news came that Vladimir Sokolov had committed suicide in pretrial detention. The official version spoke of the inability to accept the loss of status and fortune, and of fear of a long prison sentence. I felt neither joy nor satisfaction at this news, only emptiness and the realization that a long journey had come to an end. 5 years have passed since the Sokolovs' empire collapsed. I have returned to my real identity, although outwardly I have remained the same as I was in the role of Elena Vasilieva. The new hairstyle and new style have become part of me, a reminder of the time spent fighting for justice. Alexei and I live in St. Petersburg, in the same house that Victor bought for us. I have returned to teaching literature, but now at a university instead of a school. Alexei is studying at a prestigious gymnasium, showing brilliant abilities in mathematics and physics, like his father. He has grown into a thoughtful, serious boy who sometimes amazes me with the maturity of his judgments. Elena Sokolova was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, tax evasion, and complicity in the murder of her son. I followed her case through the news, but I felt no satisfaction from her punishment. Revenge did not bring me the expected relief, only the realization that justice, albeit belated, had triumphed. The Sokolovs' companies were sold or liquidated. Their fortune passed to the state and creditors. Part of the assets, by court order, was transferred to Alexei as Mikhail's only heir. These funds are in a trust fund and will be available to him when he reaches the age of majority. I do not touch this money, considering it Mikhail's legacy for his son, not compensation for what we had endured. Viktor Demidov has remained our close friend and mentor. His wife, Sophia, has become almost a grandmother to Alexei, filling the void left by the absence of Rodnych grandparents. They spend a lot of time together, and I am grateful to them for this support and love. Sometimes I think about Mikhail, about our life together, about his last days. I don't know if he really loved us as he wrote in his letter, or if we were a refuge for him from the pressure of his family. But I know that he cared about Alexei, that he was a good father, and that he tried to protect us in the end, even at the cost of his own life. I told Alexei the truth about his father when he turned 12. Not all the details, not about my role in the fall of the Sokolovs, but about how Mikhail loved him, that he did not abandon us of his own free will, that he was a good man caught in a trap of family expectations and obligations. Alexei accepted this story with surprising maturity, asked many questions, but did not express anger or resentment. He just wanted to know the truth about his origins, about his family. From time to time, articles appear in the press about the Sokolov case, about their crimes, about the fall of their empire. Sometimes these articles mention Alexei as Mikhail's heir, but his identity and whereabouts remain protected. Viktor has taken care to ensure that my son has a normal life, without the shadow of a scandal associated with his surname. I don't know if this story can be called a story about revenge. For me, it is more a story about justice, about fighting for my son's future, about how no one should remain unpunished, regardless of their wealth and influence. I am not proud of all my actions, but I do not regret the choices I made. Every decision, every step led me to today, to a calm and safe life with my son. Sometimes, at night, when Alexei is already asleep, I take out the only photograph of Mikhail that I have kept. It was taken on Alexei's birthday, a few months before the tragedy. Mikhail is smiling, holding his son in his arms. His eyes are shining with pride and love. In those moments, I allow myself to dream about what our life could have been like if everything had turned out differently. If Mikhail had found the courage to stand up to his family earlier, if his parents had accepted us, if he were alive. But the past cannot be returned, and I have learned to live in the present. Every day I am grateful that I have Alexei, that he is healthy and happy, that he has a future, not overshadowed by the shadow of his grandfather and grandmother. This is not the life I dreamed of when I met Mikhail in the library many years ago, but it is a good life, filled with meaning and love. In the end, the most important victory is not that the Sokolovs lost everything, but that Alexei and I preserved ourselves, our dignity, our ability to love and trust. Revenge does not heal wounds, but justice gives the opportunity to move forward. And we move forward day after day, building a new life on the ruins of the old, finding beauty and meaning in each new day.